Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. I have an album I want to bring to your attention this week. It's by a guy named Andy Cartwright, and it's a solo project, but he goes by the name Seabuckthorn, and this is called Crossing. Now, this is my third album I've gotten by Seabuckthorn. His I believe his second album, Turns, was a top album of mine a couple of years ago, and so I've been kind of following him ever since. I got a good lead that this album is coming out this year, so I promptly got it. One of the things that makes the album so interesting and so great is that it's an ambient album. It's not very strong on melody, but what it does as far as creating environments goes is, I think, kind of unique and unparalleled. It started me on an investigation of ambient music after I got into it, and I really haven't found very many things that kind of does the same thing as what Seabuckthorn does. His angle on ambient music is that he primarily uses guitars, specifically resonator guitars, his instrument of choice. And he comes at the instrument in a variety of ways. I mean, he on Turns from a couple years ago, he emphasized kind of quite a bit of finger picking style. But the Crossing tends to favor an exploration of the use of a bow on the resonator guitar. So if you look at the instrumentation list, it's Andy Cartwright playing bowed resonator guitar, with a smattering of clarinet, bass synth, banjo, and percussion. So in order to give you a framework for what we're going to talk about today with him, I think it's helpful to take a look at the way he plays and what he does. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a live clip of his work. This clip does not, it's a couple of years old. It's not a specific piece from this album, but it gives you kind of an idea about the angle that he's coming from as far as being a guitar player, and how he uses specific guitar techniques towards creating the ambient soundscapes that he has, that you see on the Crossing. Now, that live clip of him seems a little improvised and exploratory, but I don't get that sense from the Crossing as I'm listening to it. I get the sense that his live performances, kind of like that one, are kind of like a laboratory for him to take a look at different ways of playing the guitar and getting different effects out of them, and he brings the results of those experiments to bear on his albums. Now, again, what you'll notice about that, particularly in that clip, there's not a whole lot of melody involved. And he does hint at and use melody in a very, very sparse fashion, as you'll see. But what's more interesting to listen to, a better framework to listen to Seabuckthorn's music, is not in terms of its melodic or even its rhythmic composition, but it's timbre. The way that he plays with timbre in different ways from the guitar is absolutely fascinating and effective in terms of what he's trying to accomplish on his albums. So the question arises, what is timbre? Well, timbre is most easily defined as the quality of a sound. It's how we differentiate one sound from another. For example, if you hear this note, and then you hear the same note, but it sounds like this. The difference between those two notes is a difference of timbre. Now, you don't have to listen very hard to see that difference happens, okay? That's because timbre is very interesting in that it's the first thing we notice about a specific sound. And despite the fact that it's so immediate, timbre is notoriously difficult to talk about. We don't really have a vocabulary to talk about it. I mean, the only way that if you're going to write a piece of music and use those two different sounds is on one at the top of the page to write shakuhachi, and the top of the other page just write trombone. But otherwise, there's no way to notate that really. And we have a hard time talking about it. Usually when we talk about timbre, we have to borrow language from other parts of our senses. We say things like if something sounds full or rich, those are things like spatial or even taste descriptors that we're borrowing to help describe timbre. If we say something sounds thin or airy, that's spatial. Those things are descriptors that we use because of our awareness of how we exist in space. Now, timbre is the result of how harmonics stack on top of each other. Any given note that you play actually has lots of other notes that stack up on top of them. And the way that that stack of notes happens, the way that they align causes a sound to have a specific quality. So, for example, you listen to the trombone sound again. At the bottom of this spectrogram, you can see things are very dark and rich. That's the fundamental. That's the note that you're actually hearing. And those even rows that stack up on top of it are the different harmonics. Let's compare that to the shakuhachi. On the shakuhachi spectrogram that we're looking at, you can see a couple strong fundamentals in the bottom, but then things just start to not look so clear as they stack higher. As a matter of fact, towards the top, it stretches higher than the trombone. There are higher harmonics involved than there are on the trombone one, but they're not aligned. It just looks like a little fuzz. And that's all that kind of air that you hear in the sound of a shakuhachi. And that's characteristic for shakuhachi. You should have that sound. So even though I'm playing the same note on both of those instruments, their quality is different, the timbre is different because of the way that the harmonics stack on top of each other. Now that you have a little bit of an idea about how to look at these spectrograms, okay, I'm doing this for a reason. Let's take a little quick look at one of the tracks from the Seabuckthorn album. This is a track called It Can Ashen. And I want you in this clip to see how there's of course, you can see the same fundamentals and everything else, but up on top there's these little chirps and whistles and these high harmonics are happening due to the way that the strings are vibrating and interacting with the player. And this gets an amazing amount of depth in the music. Also, there's a point at which what sounds like a bass clarinet or clarinet comes in, or maybe it's a bass synth. And that opens up a whole new area of upper harmonics that weren't there before. And it opens up, sound-wise, your experience of the music as well. So this is It Can Ashen. Now, spectrograms are fascinating. Don't get me wrong. I think that stuff is very, very interesting, and it's a good way to point out some of the way these nuances maybe lead your ear in a way that you might not immediately notice. But on the other hand, spectrograms kind of rob the listener of an experience, I think. It flattens the experience of listening to this kind of music. And timbre is something to be experienced. People perceive timbre at the very leading edge of perceptual awareness. And although we have a preference for things like pitches and rhythms in our style or the way that we normally listen to music, pitch and rhythm is something that a note does. A note is either high or low or fast or slow, but timbre is what the note is. It's how you experience the note in the very first second that you listen to it. It's like the difference between feeling the warmth of the sun on your face and then looking up and saying, "Oh, it's the sun." You know, it's something that you experience in a very visceral way. And because of that, because Seabuckthorn is so good at mining the timbral potentials of vibrating strings, essentially, The Crossing, all of his albums, but especially The Crossing, is a very cinematic and immersive experience. It's world building. It creates not just environments, but whole worlds. The Crossing is meditative. It's engaging. It earns for me the title, soothing but not boring. I can listen to this album and be completely immersed in it, or I can also just let it go in the background and go on my merry way. And that's a delicate balance to try to navigate, especially in the style of music that Seabuckthorn is doing. I mean, there's many ambient artists who do non-intrusive music, but it takes a really special vision and a very meticulous concept to make an album that is can also be just you can sink into and listen and appreciate for its musicality for what it is. And it is musical. This is the other thing about it. Even though it seems like, our standard ideas of rhythm and pitch are put on the way back burner, it's still an incredibly emotional and immersive experience. It points to Cartwright's vision that he can make a song where the melody is just this lone, plucked banjo that feels like it's just resonating off across like an open wide ocean, and it almost feels like a distant bell is like a climax to the piece. I can't recommend the Crossing highly enough, especially to people who are open to more ambient styles of music. I have not found many things that equal to it, that do the same thing as it does. And this is another opportunity to support independent music. He's Seabuckthorn has a presence on Bandcamp. So, buy the album and whatever format that you'd like if you're interested in it, and support the artist as well. All right. So that's all I got for you guys on Seabuckthorn this week. I appreciate you staying with me. And I will come back next week with a new album of the week. Actually, no, I take that back. Next week is going to be the second part of the roundup that I had from Father's Day. So I'll have another 6 albums to lay in front of you in very quick rat-a-tat fashion. But if you want to know when that's coming out, like, subscribe, share, and let everybody know what's going on. And until then, I will catch you guys on the flip side.